Half of New York against John Wick? That doesn't even sound like an exaggeration anymore. The sheer scale of the criminal underworld in John Wick's universe isn't just about the fact that he's taken out 439 people across 4 movies. Most of them were bodyguards protecting his targets, but that's not the craziest part. In John Wick, Chapter 2, right after the bounty on his head goes live, he arrives in New York, and on his way to the nearest subway station, he randomly runs into 8 assassins in the crowd. In reality, there were 10, but one was deliberately tracking him and another wasn't planning to kill him. Then in Chapter 3, after he gets excommunicado status, they all had an hour to prepare. They could have just waited for Wick in the library where he stashed his stuff, knowing he'd probably show up, but no. Some assassin is just casually hanging out in the crowd when suddenly he gets a notification on his phone. A contract on John Wick. And what do you know? Wick happens to walk by that exact second, and there are 8 of them. 8 assassins in just a few blocks. And that's only the ones who actually had the guts to go after him. How many others just decided to sip this one out? Or how many didn't even recognize John Wick's face? Some of them must have. Lucky for them. What's really crazy isn't just how many assassins are out there. It's how many contracts are being placed. Like they say, where there's demand, there's always going to be supply. If a hitman can blend into the crowd dressed as a street violinist, that means there's a steady demand for taking out targets in public places. If the assassins in John Wick's world weren't so against using technology, I bet they'd have their own Hitman app, just like Uber, but for contracts. On one hand, it's not even surprising that across 4 movies, the only time the police ever got involved was to wish Mr. Wick a good evening. Where haven't we seen corrupt cops before? Every crime movie has them. But on the other hand, the problem isn't corruption. It's that the entire society in this world is loyal to the criminal underworld. The criminal network in John Wick isn't just some underground economy trying to avoid taxes and government oversight. They don't need to bribe judges, prosecutors, lawyers, or officials. None of that even matters here. In the first movie, there were hints that they used blackmail to influence the outside world, but as the series went on, the underworld became more and more isolated, diving deeper into some almost religious and spiritual themes. It's like the idea of a social contract, which they mention in the movies, applies not just to criminals, but to how the regular world interacts with them. As long as the criminals keep their violence among themselves and don't harm ordinary people, law enforcement just looks the other way. There's no other way to explain why the public doesn't seem to care about all this chaos. And that's exactly why the criminal underworld in John Wick is so huge and runs so smoothly, because they don't have to deal with courts or legal loopholes. As crazy as it sounds, with this many assassins and contracts going around, the underworld can't actually grow any bigger than it already is. Death rate is just way too high. Just from John Wick alone, a few hundred assassins get wiped out every week. There's no point in looking for logic in any of this. These are just the rules of John Wick's criminal underworld. It's an alternative reality, plain and simple. Even the directors Chad Stahelski and David Leitch have said it themselves. Here's what they had to say. We go to the movies to have a good time. We wanted to create a world where you could just enjoy yourself. A world that fits the way the main character operates, even if it looks unrealistic. We're not fans of making things overly serious. If the main character is supposed to wipe out hundreds of bad guys across different locations, then he needs to exist in a world where he doesn't have to worry about the authorities interfering and all the consequences that would come with that. But John Wick wasn't always meant to be this way. In the original script, there were no hints of secret societies or mystical elements, something that, in my opinion, they went overboard with in Chapter 3. It was just about rich people using their money and power to do bad things. At some point, though, the idea of making a traditional crime thriller was scrapped, and Chad Stahelski brought in his love for mythology to shape John Wick's world. Take the concierge of the Continental. He was given the name Charon, a clear reference to the ferryman of the dead from Greek mythology, who received a gold coin as payment to ferry souls across the river into the underworld. In this case, the underworld is essentially the criminal New York of John Wick, where, according to the directors, there's no place for ordinary people. That's why the film doesn't focus on them at all. The use of gold coins as currency isn't about keeping some underground economy hidden from the outside world. The biggest contracts are still paid in dollars. The coins are just another way to add mythological depth to the John Wick universe. According to the creators, these coins don't actually have a monetary value. They simply serve as proof of a mutual agreement within the assassin world. Even the comparison to Karen makes sense. He took payment for ferrying souls across the Styx, but that money had no real consumer value in the afterlife. There's no traditional market economy in the underworld, but no matter how you look at it, if something is used to trade goods and services, it's essentially money. The only difference is that in John Wick's world, the cost of things isn't always clear. And that's not even mentioning the fact that these coins are made from one of the rarest and most valuable metals in the world. In the assassin world, the social contract is the same as a business deal, with one major difference: your word or your blood is what seals the deal. The assassin service industry alone is something else. In every major city, or maybe every city, there's an entire infrastructure built just for them. Take John's interaction with the arms dealer in Rome, also known as the sommelier in their lingo. It's one of the best moments in Chapter 2.
I'd like a tasting. May I suggest the Benelli M4, an Italian classic. Dessert. Dessert.
The professionalism and level of service in this world is top tier, easily one of the coolest things about John Wick. And yes, this service industry is designed specifically for assassins. Of course, hitmen aren't the only ones in the criminal underworld, but at the end of the day, crime is just another business, and everything revolves around that business. And that's exactly why this world operates independently, separate from the outside world. The only truly valuable and in-demand asset capable of settling disputes between factions is a killer. Corrupt officials and other shady figures exist, but they're not the main players here. All those classic crime bosses and gangsters you see in other movies, in the world of John Wick, they're obsolete. Instead, contract killers have taken their place. This shift has turned assassination into a full-fledged art form, a craft elevated to a near-religious level. Hiring a hitman to take out a family member? Ordering a kill on literally anyone? Nothing taboo about that here.
I had a marker.
Whose?
Her brother.
I see. You had no choice.
In John Wick's world, assassins are the ultimate business tool. Murder itself is just another part of the business. And there are only two hard rules. Always pay your debts. No business on continental grounds. Break them, and you're as good as dead. Unless, of course, you're John Wick, a man with insane determination, discipline, and an absolutely unbreakable will. If you like this video, hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and leave a comment. And don't forget to share it with your friends. See you next time.